Hello, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual event with Carolina de Robertis and Jaquira Díaz to discuss The President and the Frog. Carolina de Robertis is the author of 5 novels, including Cantoras, winner of a Stonewall Book Award and a Reading Women Award, and a finalist for the Kirkus Prize and a Lambda Literary Award. It was also selected as a New York Times Editor's Choice. Her work has been translated into 17 languages, and she has received a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and numerous other honors. An author of Uruguayan origin, she teaches at San Francisco State University and lives in Oakland, California with her wife and 2 children. Jacqui De Diaz was born in Puerto Rico and raised in Miami. She is the author of Ordinary Girls, winner of a Whiting Award, a Florida Book Awards Gold Medal, and a Lambda Literary Awards finalist. Diaz's work has been published in The Guardian, Time Magazine, T, the New York Times Style Magazine, and the Best American Essays 2016, among other publications. She's the recipient of 2 Pushcart Prizes, an Elizabeth George Foundation grant, and fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the Kenyon Review, and the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing. A former visiting assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's MFA program in creative writing and consulting editor at the Kenyon Review. She splits her time between Montreal, Miami Beach, and the UK, with her spouse, the writer Lars Horn. Her second book, I Am Deliberate, is forthcoming from Algonquin Books. So a little bit about your screen. Throughout tonight's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. And of course, you can order copies of The President and the Frog by pressing the green button right below. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, let's bring our guests on stage. Hi.
Hi.
Hola, Shakira!
Hola. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I'm so happy to talk about this beautiful, beautiful book, The President and the Frog. I hope that if you haven't gotten a copy, that you do so tonight from Books and Books. Support your indie bookstores. Well, I guess I want to start by telling you all about how I learned about the work of Carolina de Robertis. The first book I read of hers was Cantoras, and it kind of, to say that it blew me away is an understatement, right? It was one of the books that I read as I was touring my own book in 2019, and it felt, in a moment of so much stress and so much chaos, so much travel, it felt like the book was a place that I could escape to. Even though in a lot of ways, the book is describing a moment of oppression, of a very oppressive regime. It felt like a balm. And in part because it definitely, for me as a queer woman, it felt like I haven't read this before. This is kind of life-changing. It's changing the face of what Latinx books even looks like, to see all these queer women in one book, and then also to have them share themselves completely. It felt like it was reaching out to me. And so when I got my hands on this copy of The President and the Frog, I thought, I'm so excited for this. And then as I started reading, I felt something very similar. I thought, wait a minute, no one has done this. This is kind of changing what a novel can do. And the way that I think about a novel, it feels transcendent. It feels like it's talking about a very specific cultural and political moment, while also referring to the current cultural and political moment and resonating across time and space. And I guess before we even talk about that, Carolina, I'd love to talk about how this book came about for you. Can you talk about how the book began for you, and how did you get the idea for the characters in the story?
Okay, well, thank you for that rather mind-blowing context and introduction. That was a lot to take in. Might take me a few days to take it in. Thank you, Jaquira. And especially coming from you. Ordinary Girls is up on the shelf, right? Let's see if I can do this right there. And it is just so absolutely transcendent and visionary. I also, in reading your memoir, was just blown away. And also, it blasted open for me what memoir can do. So, thank you. It is amazing to be in literary connection and conversation and sisterhood with you. Thank you. And thank you for doing this. Thank you, Books and Books. Buy books from Books and Books and all of your fabulous indie bookstores. And thank you, everyone, for coming and being part of this gathering and this celebration. So, in terms of how the book started and how it came to me, books often sit inside of me as seeds for a very long time before I start writing them. Cantoras, I had been sort of deep listening to the stories of this crew of women who had come of age as lesbians during the Uruguayan dictatorship since 2001. So for about 14 years before I actually sat down and said, I'm going to write a novel drawing on these stories. So that's a long gestation time. I call it the dreaming phase of the book. So the dreaming phase of this book started 8 years ago. I was living in Uruguay in 2013. And Jose Mujica was president at the time. And he's the progressive president of Uruguay, who is part of the inspiration for this book. And he said one day in an interview, almost passingly, that one of the ways that he survived during brutal solitary confinement, because he was a political prisoner during the dictatorship, during this, horrific time in Uruguayan history, which I had written about in other books like Cantoras. One of the ways that he survived political imprisonment was by talking to a frog. And it's just one of those things, right? As a creative writer, as a novelist, sometimes there's things that just kind of stay with you and sit with you. And I found myself really wanting to hear those conversations, to know about that relationship between him and the frog. And it felt like it maybe a portal into bigger, deeper questions about, how do we carry on when everything seems lost? Or what does it mean to lead? What is power? And where do we source it? Here's this man who is seems like such an unlikely person to lead the country, to be president, and here he is. And it was during his presidency, I'll say too, that, you're talking about being queer writers, it may seem like this sort of cis male president, that writing about him is not also about queer liberation. But for me, I don't know that I'll ever write anything that isn't about queer liberation on some level. And gay marriage was legalized in Uruguay during his presidency while I was living there, before the United States. So it was the first time I ever felt, with my wife and my 2 kids, we were living in Uruguay at the time, like what it was like to walk down the street in a country that actually mirrored the dignity of my family on a legal level. It didn't happen in the States. It happened in Uruguay, which turns on its head some of the ideas we have here in the US about, who's advanced and progressive and who's backwards and has an issue with authoritarianism, So all of that was kind of in the cooker. And by the time I sat down to write the book, though, it was the Trump era. Trump was president. And so what you said about this book kind of speaking to multiple layers, that was part of my hope and my intention, is that it's not only about, this time in Uruguay or even South American dictatorships of a particular era, but really about these deeper questions about, power and countries and cultural hostility and what's possible.
One of the things that I was talking about and how the book resonated with me, and how I felt like it was speaking to that cultural moment, that cultural era, but also today, like to what's happening today, what was happening in 2016. And I thought about, how do you write characters, right, that were alive in a certain era in a way that still resonates with us, in a way that helps us think about like what goes through a person's mind. And I was thinking about the kind of complex digging that you have to do as a novelist in order to get into the mind of someone, when you're not relying on plot, when like the plot is not moving the story forward, but really you're stuck in a hole. Like the character was stuck in a hole.
He's stuck in a hole, man.
How do you even do that and keep the reader interested? And I was like turning pages and thinking, holy shit, how did she do this?
Oh, thank you.
One of the things that I really noticed that was that the character, like the president's character, wasn't perfect, right? There's a moment when he's talking about that, passing marriage equality, and how he really didn't understand queer people, and yet he understood that the need for liberty, equal rights was for all, even though he didn't really understand, even though he was kind of homophobic. The character, and how like you can have someone who's very, very flawed, and yet still like his humanity will still resonate like as a character. So I really thought, wow, that is so well done. Something I want to commend you for.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that was part of it too, is like as a queer writer. I mean, I think it's interesting, like I know that many of us who are queer readers, and I certainly count myself in that tribe, we're hungry for queer stories, right? And so we want queer stories with queer protagonists. I want that too, and I'm writing that, and I'm going to keep writing that. But there's also maybe something powerful about us sort of, I don't know if infiltrating is the right verb, but maybe it is, like really, unabashedly infiltrating also like other consciousnesses and centers of power, and right, and looking from within his consciousness, like, yeah, how is he actually looking at gay people, and what was his evolution? What was his evolution around feminism, and all of those, trying to write them from within, always carrying myself, which is an immigrant queer writer, right? Feminist writer, right?
Yes, he also has that moment when he realizes, wait a minute, maybe he was being sexist when talking about women, and then you're like, and then he's like,
yeah,
oh shit. And it's more than that, but it was like a moment where he's not perfect. He doesn't go into the whole thing perfect. He has so much time to think and reflect. I mean, he's in a hole, and he kind of has those moments of recognition as he's having this conversation. Can you talk a little bit about how much the current political moment, or the 2016, how much that influenced your writing? You were still in the writing process, right, in 2016 during the election?
Yeah, I didn't start writing it until after the election. It was all dreaming phase before that, and yes, just as all the comment, I am drinking mate, yerba mate, just like the people in the book, and like in Cantoras, and all my characters drink mate, so here I am, including all of you, and inviting you all into the ronda where the mate gets passed around. Yes, the writing of the book really was during the Trump era. So before that, so right in the Obama era, thinking about the book, I wrote in my journal way back in 2014, if I ever am able to pull off this very bold, weird, wild idea of this book about Mujica and the frog, or someone like Mujica and the frog, because it's an unnamed protagonist in the end. My wildest dream for it is that it would be sort of a love letter to anyone who's felt despair. And and then the Trump era hits, right? And our relationships to despair, not that the oppressions that got emboldened were anything new, or new to many communities, but I think even the public conversation around resistance, around safety, around open hostility, was something very different for many of our communities, right? And so I was really consciously working on both levels. And I do think that, I've written 5 novels now, and writing what is thought of as historical fiction, I really do believe that, at least for me, in writing historical fiction, we're always working with a double consciousness, where you're writing about the time and place and the specificity of it, but we're also imbuing it with where we are and who we are and the air that we breathe. And I don't know that I was as conscious of it with my first novel. I was just trying to write a novel. It took me 8 years, and I didn't know what I was doing consciously, on that journey. But by this time, I really felt like I really want to consciously intend that. This draws on Latin American history, but I want this book to be about something larger. That's my hope. That's my dream. And I think part of it too is that I had been writing about the Uruguayan and Argentinian sort of dictatorships, and even the Chilean coup shows up in my books. Like, I've been researching them and writing about that era, thinking about it for 18 years when I sat down to write this book. It's kind of a long time, and and in Cantoras and in Invisible Mountain and in Perla, there's a lot of detail, a lot of like really writing in specific historical detail, and maybe that sort of freed me with this book to shift and to do something different and kind of bring it into parable, right? Like the parable fabulist, like there's a man, there's a whole, you know, the government does this thing. And because it allows it to sort of be all of us and kind of, yes, be rooted in a time and place. I feel like it's a very Latin American story, and I wanted to be unapologetic about that, but also it's lifted up. That's my hope.
I mean, it definitely, for me, it got me thinking about parable, but also, while some of your characters, like the president, are kind of recognizable and we can speculate about them, I think your choice not to name them, your choice not to name the country, kind of elevated that narrative for me. Like, I knew where it was, and yet I found myself thinking about, where else could this be? This could be so many other places. This doesn't necessarily really have to be Latin America, because it speaks to so many other countries, and even like the North is mentioned, and we kind of know what the North is, and yet it in a lot of ways it refuses to center, you know, the US or the North. Can you talk a little bit about that choice, and was that a difficult choice not to name the character, not to name the countries?
What a wonderful question. Thank you. I mean, no, it wasn't actually difficult. It was very freeing. And I think one of the reasons that choice felt really freeing, and I was able to kind of arrive at it pretty early on in writing the book, is thanks to reading. You know, I mean, I feel like I've been inspired by so many works that certainly that engage in specificity. Like I said, Cantoras is like definitely rooted in a great deal of historical specificity, like this one time and place. But always we can resonate on other levels with whatever we read. But then there's this other tradition of works, right, that are set in unnamed countries in particular regions to free the story and the narrative to explore the truth in maybe a wilder, deeper way. So Daniel Alarcón in At Night We Walk in Circles, he's Peruvian. It's mostly based on Peru, but it's not Peru. Guapa by Salim Haddad is a novel I love that is this, you know, queer set in a small unnamed Middle Eastern country. And he himself has roots in many Middle Eastern countries. And so he's doing this really interesting thing with this kind of Arab Spring and queer awakening happening in this country where he's sort of destabilized the place. Mohsin Hamid in Exit West, he doesn't name the country that the refugees sort of first emerged from, but then he names other places. So this is just a few examples of you know, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Autumn of the Patriarch. I mean, there's just that there are these beautiful traditions, and I, as a reader, had been really inspired by those books, and I saw what the possibilities were of that, and I thought, this will really free me, because, you know, it is a kind of bold move to just go ahead and help yourself to the inside consciousness of a character based on a president of a country, you know. And there's something about simultaneously you know, wanting to free myself from the details of his life, also pay tribute to him, but also kind of respect his space by giving that fictional buffer with the unnamed protagonist in the unnamed country. And yeah, so I found it freeing, and it was really different from what I had done before as a writer. And I find that exciting too. As writers, we can do many different things. The novel is so capacious. It's as a form, as a genre, it's capable of so many different, you know, styles and voices and worlds and possibilities. And, you know, as writers, I think it's really beautiful when in our careers we allow ourselves to be drawn to different modes, if that's what's true for us.
One of the writers you mentioned, Daniel Alarcón, I remember reading his story collection and then his first novel, Love City Radio, and thinking, oh my God, you can do this.
Yes.
And then reading the book, I thought, not only is it writing in what I think of as a Latin American tradition, but it's also kind of, you know, telling all those other writers, all those other predominantly men, you know, male writers that came before, kind of saying, step aside. I'm owning this now. This is mine. This is new territory. And kind of a reinventing of, I don't know, not a genre necessarily, but of not even a form, but a tradition, like a reinventing of a tradition.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Because even when I think about what you just said, that made me conscious of the books that I named were actually all by male writers. the ones who sort of claimed this unnamed country work, right? There's something very declarative about it. And, you know, it's taken me some time to get into that space as a woman writer, and as a woman, even as a genderqueer woman, to get into to be declarative and authoritative in that way. So it's
to claim ownership of that space.
Yeah.
Now that so we talked a little bit about the unnamed characters, the unnamed country. What kind of research does a book like this require? A book that is, you know, both rooted in history, but also kind of re-envisioning, or like a re-envisioning of what history requires.
Well, I don't know how it would have been for me if this had been my first novel. I think the research would have been very different, but because it was my fifth, and because of the subject matter I had been swimming with, you know, by the time I started writing, I had already been researching, which is another way of saying obsessing over, the revolutionary era and the dictatorship era of Uruguay and that region of South America for 18 years. And so, you know, I've got shelves and shelves and shelves of books in English and Spanish, and even a couple in Italian, which I read very badly, but I have them, you know, about those eras. And so I was drawing on some really deep dives from before. And that was an interesting experience for me, because I'm used to doing so much research as part of my novels. It's just been the material that I've been drawn to just has, at least for me, required it. And so that was kind of refreshing, that I was sort of drawing on a pool that was already filled. And then in terms of, you know, Pepe Mujica, of course, I took a really deep dive on him. And then on other elements that cropped up in the book, like once I knew, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but like once I knew that the experience of Japanese refugees after World War II landing in South America, which was actually a history that I really didn't know about until I encountered a little tiny footnote in research. So then I went down that avenue, you know. And I also worked with an authenticity reader, also known as sensitivity readers. I feel like authenticity reader is more accurate, because the problem isn't that people are sensitive. The problem is that the readers might be sensitive about it, right? The problem is that authors aren't being authentic in how they're writing culture, and maybe we need to know where our blinders are and do that. So I always do that whenever I can around drafts with many different identities. And in this case, you know, I worked with an authenticity reader who is of Japanese origin and a really smart reader and thinker, and sort of like, please tell me what blinders you see. So you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, and I mean, I'm all about, you know, bring in the authenticity readers, help people make your book better, help people see how, you know, let people help you see where your blinders might be, you know, if we want to write things with depth and respect. So that's like another layer of research that happens. And then of course there's the aesthetic research in terms of, in order to pull off this particular thing, what can I read, right? So you said something about, you know, how do you shape a plot when like technically it's just like a man and an animal in a hole, and like how do you shape tension around that? So what are the books that have done that, right? So going back to Kiss of the Spider Woman by Manuel Puig, that novel was so important to me, and that's part of, I think, how this is sort of rooted in the Latin American tradition, right? This sort of, that is two men in a jail cell talking to each other for like 90% of the book, right? And yet there's so much story. Apparently you can make a movie out of it. You can make a musical out of two men in a jail cell, you know, talking to each other. So, and many other books that kind of are fueled by conversation, or that use parable for political ends, or to talk about political ideas, as well as tell human stories.
It's so interesting that you brought up Kiss of the Spider Woman. I remember reading Kiss of the Spider Woman when I was, I want to say, a teenager, because it was one of my dad's favorite books. And thinking about how, I had no idea what was happening at the time, right? I was like, these are two guys talking to each other. And then reading it years later and thinking, if this book were written today, I think it would be a trans woman.
Completely.
It would be a totally different book. And something so exciting to think about how so reading it, like, I don't know how I would read it today. I think reading it today, I would read it like maybe like it's dated, but also I would read, I would bring my own experiences to it, and I would think about things in so differently. So reading Kiss of the Spider Woman, how can you talk a little bit about that influence on you writing this today, or writing this in 2016?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you touched such a rich vein, Jaquira, because I took a really deep dive with the Kiss of the Spider Woman in the fall, because I was invited to write a new foreword for it, actually, in español. Para publicación en español. So Vintage Español is an imprint at Penguin Random House that does Spanish language books, and they have a Vintage Clásicos line, and they were putting out new versions of the classics. And I don't think I have it out here. No, I don't have it out here. But there's a new cover, and they published it again in Spanish with a foreword that I got to write. And so I took a deep dive. I read a 400-page biography of Puig. It's like reading and rereading and really thinking. And I think it is still a real touchstone, like really important classic in terms of what it broke open around queer experience. I think Puig was absolutely trying to make his way towards language for transgender experience, and that his character is a trans woman who is not languaging in that way. I actually, if I had to put down $200 on a bet, I would be like, Puig was a trans woman who never got a chance to fully come out even to herself. This is my theory after my deep dive. I don't and I don't know that Puig's estate would really love that I'm saying that, because it's it's complicated. But I will say I tried to write into in that forward the connections between today's trans movements, the X and the E, Latinx, Latine, in the Spanish context, right? The ways that that was birthed, and he was like a grandfather of sort of what we're doing now, in a lot of ways, and also he was part of the boom, and he was constantly. Puig was, now I'm using the pronoun that he was presenting with the world with, but Puig was constantly being condescended to by Mario Vargas Llosa, by Julio Cortázar, Garcia Marquez. They were all winning the prizes and getting the attention, and he was writing these gay stories, and then they started copying him. Anyway, so really, I'm like, he blasted open Latin, and also Latin American literature is so obsessed with liberation and politics and the guerrilla revolutionaries and all of this, right? And he was the first one to write about yes, but there's two men, and there's a political revolutionary, and then there's this gay man who's probably actually a trans woman, like a gay, at the very least, somebody who's very much in their gender queerness, and can you, political revolutionary straight guy, can you love this person? Can you love them completely? Because if you can't, then what the hell kind of revolution is it? I feel like that subtext in that book, it was the first time we got that. So that subtext was also very much with me here. What is the revolution? Revolution for whom? I
do think that the book is asking those questions in a lot of different ways. Especially, there's a moment when the president is thinking about. I'm looking at I forgot exactly what the phrasing you used, but he was thinking about soldiers and thinking about the military and thinking about, well, actually, are they also the people? Are they also part of the people? And talking about, can you actually forgive them when they're actually, boys, and they were actually probably, just babies or children when I was in the hole. So I thought those were very, very interesting questions that the book was asking, that the president was asking and thinking about. And I want to just reach out to the audience and say to you all, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I'd be happy to ask them. We're getting close to Q&A time from the audience, so I just want to invite you all to join us. But before we get there, Carolina, I definitely I'm interested in this section that happens kind of in the middle of the book. Not really the middle, but it's around page 84, when the president is in the whole conversation with the frog, and there are several what-if questions. And I'm wondering if you could read a little bit from that section.
I'll read from it very briefly. I'll just jump around a little. Thank you. Yes. So this is the book goes back and forth between 2016. He's just found out about the disastrous election in the North, and he's having an interview, and he's tempted to tell this secret story about the frog, and then being with the frog in the hole 40 years ago. And the frog starts telling him, you have to tell me stories. It's very important, but we don't know why yet, why this storytelling is going to be something that's connected to your future. And so he tells a story about how the movement, the revolutionary movement that he was part of, began. Let me tell you this, in this hole where no historian will ever hear me, so it's probably pointless, but what the hell? They were dreamers. It all started with a dream, with a what if. What if, they said, a country could share its resources equally enough so that all people have what they need to survive? What if workers had the right to decent pay? What if every child deserves a chance to learn, to eat, to be safe? What if our society respected all the people in it and not just the wealthy few? What if we had a conscience? What if there's another way? What if we could be governed by the principles of dignity and humanity rather than exploitation? And what if those principles reached all the way into the halls of power? What if the halls of power could be shaken into newer, kinder forms? What if we could organize ourselves in a new manner, one dreamed of by visionary thinkers but never quite seen before? What if the people could actually lead themselves or have leaders who genuinely worked on their behalf? What if was the great refrain of their song. On many nights in that time, before falling asleep, I would see the rising tides of Latin American revolutions, not just as an idea, but as an immense ocean wave cresting skyscraper high, full of faces, thousands of them, flecking the foam, gathering strength to sweep across the continent. We would wash away generations of bloodshed, clean the wounds, flood communities with the healing balm of freedom. You can laugh, you can scoff, you can wonder about the weird logic of humans like me, but it's the truth. That's what revolution looked like to me when I gave my life to it. A balm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. That was beautiful. I mean, it's very telling to me that a book that takes place predominantly like a man and imprisoned in a hole is so full of hope. I mean, it's strange to when you say it out loud, but it is that the message throughout is very hopeful. And it's looking toward a future, even from within that hole, right? Looking toward a possible future and what is possible. Mm-hmm. The what ifs are questions of hope and of changing the world.
Yeah.
And I think that message comes across throughout the whole book, not just that moment. Although that moment for me, I feel like was kind of like, if this were, as someone said in the comments, the President and the Frog the musical or the President and the Frog the movie, I think that those questions would be like part of the opening for me. The main musical number.
Well, right, that riff. What if? Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that. Now I want to hear it put to music. But I feel like that's it. Like that what if, isn't that part of what drives us? Those of us who do dream a better future, or who in some way devote our lives to cultivating something beautiful in the world against erasure or in resistance.
I think in a lot of ways that your book is asking the kinds of questions that I would ask in nonfiction, right? In speculative nonfiction, thinking about a future and thinking about the real world. And so those questions for me resonate in ways that they're not just, questions of the fictional world. They're questions of the real world, and that we should probably, be asking all of our, ourselves. And so yeah. I think for me, that's one of the things that I was thinking about, those what if questions as I kept reading. What if we could change the world?
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Yeah.
So I guess I want to hear from all of you, the audience, before we run out of time. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A or in the chat, whatever is accessible to you. We do have a couple questions already, and one of them is actually from Books and Books. They would like to know, what are you reading?
Well, I'd love to know what you're reading too, Jaquira, but oh my God, my reading life is, this is the Beso de la Mujer Araña. This is the new Kiss of the Spider Woman. I just realized it is over here. This happens to be here. So there it is, with the new prologo. But that's not what I'm reading. What I am reading Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge. It just came out this spring, and it's absolutely phenomenal. It is such a gorgeous, stunning novel on the sentence level, and what it does for opening out history. I'm just blown away. I have been absolutely loving The Kissing Bug by Daisy Hernandez, the braiding within nonfiction of a personal story and, sort of race and justice and medicine within sort of honing in on a particular disease. It's such a stunning book. And she's actually in the house today. Hi, Daisy.
Hi, Daisy.
Thank you for coming. That book is really incredible. And it did just come out, I believe, in June. Dalma Llanos Figueroa, this isn't a recent read, but her novel, Daughters of the Stone, is just stunning. And I encourage everyone to go get that too. And thank you for being in the house, Dalma. Other things reading right now. So I just finished reading Boomerang, which is a bilingual poetry collection by Achi Ovejas. And so talk about people who've been breaking ground forever. I mean, she's been publishing for 30 years and she's just such a brilliant writer and queer Cuban writer for those who don't know her work. And I'm really excited about her poetry collection. It comes out in September, October, and it's truly breathtaking. That's just a few. Jaquira, what about you? My pile is like this. My mesa de luz, my night table is like, my kids are always like, the tower is gonna fall over, It's very aspirational, the tower. But Jaquira.
I have been reading this wonderful book, The President and the Frog. I'm working on a young adult book, and so I just started reading, or I'm halfway through Akwaeke Emezi's Pet, which is so gorgeous and and it's kind of funny and scary. I also just finished Liberty, Caitlin Greenidge's Liberty.
You did?
Which I thought was so beautiful. Also, I admire how she is brilliant and can also it feels like she got so much poetry into those sentences.
Yes.
The sentences are so lyrical.
Yes.
She's absolutely one of my favorite writers. What else am I reading? That's all I can think of right now. I don't have anything next to my table except I have all of Akwaeke Emezi's books, and I'm just reading Pet, and I kind of started their memoir, Dear Centauron, which is kind of written as letters to several people and is also kind of beautiful and intricate, and it feels like they don't feel like letters, they feel more like poems, like prose poems. But yeah, that's what I'm reading right now.
That's awesome.
Carolina, you were gonna say?
I was gonna say, I'll just throw out, there's a few more names I could talk about them, but I'll just name them. These are recent books. Monkey Boy by Francisco Goldman. I really enjoyed, recent book, very powerful. Se me escapó, ¿sabes? I don't remember what the other one was, but it was really good. Infinite Country, I'll just say, Patricia Engel, and What's Mine and Yours by Naima Koster both came out this spring and are also gorgeous. So it's just so much goodness to read. Yeah,
there's a lot going on right now.
I mean, I feel like it's rich, right? It's really so fortunate.
I'm definitely, I feel like the writing world is changing very, very slowly, but that there's a lot more that you can actually read and enjoy now than ever before. Maybe it's the pandemic, maybe it's the publishing world kind of changing for the better after so many years of queer writers, Black writers, Latinx writers kind of pushing the publishing world to change, and that it's just, now catching up. There's a question in the chat from Dalma Llanos Figueroa, whose writing I deeply admire, and Dalma has a book coming out, I want to say next year, that I'm very excited about. I still haven't gotten my copy of it, so I just want to say, if you want to send one my way, I'm excited to read it.
Ooh, can I get in on that?
So Dalva wants to know, how do you handle the dichotomy between the physical restrictions of the character with the need for expansion, setting, variety, backstory on the part of the reader in order to keep the narrative vibrant? Very detailed question.
Yeah, that's a really great, insightful question. Very much a writer's question, right? And I think, I think containment can have its own power, right? And sometimes within containment, you can sort of plumb the whole world in a way more freely. Another one of the books that I went back to see how it was done was Women Talking by Miriam Toews, which is just a stunning novel about women in a religious community who've been like devastatingly sexually abused, and they have 2 days to figure out what to do. Do they try to leave? What do they do? And they're just talking. It's literally women talking for 2 days. And so it's just conversation. It's extremely contained into this one barn where they're hiding from the men in the colony to talk. And so and yet there's so much at stake, right? So one thing is always reading. Reading will just open things up for us and allow possibilities, right? There's so much aesthetic possibility within this beautiful thing called the novel. But the other thing too is that even if you have just two characters in a room alone together, as some of these books, unveil, people have their whole consciousness with them all the time. Right. And so even if you maybe you have no variety possible within setting, but you do through memory. Right. Because people are carrying their memories with them. And so within a person's consciousness is so much richness and so much, there are real stakes here. This is a person who's, devoted himself to the revolution, feels like everything's lost. His whole country is shut down and sort of really been destroyed by this dictatorship, maybe permanently. He doesn't know. And should he go on or should he just die in this hole? Though that's a very big set of existential questions. So the stakes can come from within, is what I'll say. In some stories, the stakes can come from within, and the richness of possible settings and textures and vocal varieties can come from within, because people are amazing and we really are, multiverses inside.
Oh, thank you. I love that. We really have multiverses. Yes. I want to say that some of that, the way that you did that for me came through in the storytelling, like you said, access to memory. And I thought this is such a challenge. Like in my writer's mind, I can't possibly think about how do I even do this, and yet you did it, and it's so seamless.
Oh, thank
that
you.
It's like storytelling and memory, and that character has access to all these things, and so we get them without even leaving that hole necessarily.
Thank you.
So another question. Oh, so is the book in Spanish yet? When can we see a conversation like this in Spanish with you? Eres una genia.
Muchas gracias y hola. Muchas gracias, qué lindo.
This is a question from Tania Zabalegui Hincapié.
Hola, Tania. Muchas gracias. Qué lindo. I am so pleased to say that the book is being translated into Spanish. And I'm so pleased. Hola. And I'm so pleased to say that there's a really excellent translator. I translated Cantoras into Spanish with a consultant, and it absolutely kicked my butt. I am a translator, but usually from Spanish to English. So English to Spanish was a different challenge. Kicked my behind. Was amazing. I'm glad I did it. In this case, it's someone else, and he's really fantastic. We've actually been having a lovely correspondence about, colloquialisms and possibilities and the tone of the book and gender and how the gender bending elements might work differently in Spanish. What do I want to do, and what will he try? So I'm really pleased. I don't know exactly when it comes out, but I'm delighted that it's on its way. Está en camino.
Good. I'm excited for that. I have to say that I wish I had enough, written Spanish that I could actually translate my own work, but I think it would have taken me another 12 years to translate my own book. So, that's very exciting. A question from Ivelisse, who is also in the audience. Ivelisse, did you face any resistance when you started publishing? Has the resistance lessened the more you've published? Wow.
How many hours do we have? No, I'm kidding. joke. I think this is Ibelis Rodriguez.
Ibelis, are you Ibelis Rodriguez? Yes.
Another author sighting.
Ibelis Rodriguez, everyone, author of Love War Stories.
Love War Stories, such an incredible story collection that I love to teach from at the MFA where I teach at San Francisco State, and etc. Hola, Ibelis, thank you so much for coming. So the question, yes, I mean, it's, the publishing, I'm very grateful for all of the support that I've gotten from my publisher, and for all of the ways that, so many people on the team have gone to bat for my books. And it's not just about a publisher or supportive individuals. I think the whole system needs to keep changing. The publishing industry was not originally designed to support and uplift and sustain Latinx voices, radical voices, queer voices. And so definitely there have been a lot of, moments on the journey that have been, real challenges. And I know I'm not the only one. I mean, and I think that's one of the incredible things about having community as an author, with other people who are also taking those risks and holding those dreams, because it is really worth it. We need our stories in the world. And that's part of what Jaquira was saying about, like, now we were having more books that speak to and reflect the many richnesses of our experiences, and that don't center whiteness or maleness or straightness only, or in the ways that they have before. So estamos en camino, and I think we're in a very exciting time in terms of change, but we still have a really long way to go collectively. And also, I feel like for me, part of getting older, I've had 5 books, I'm middle-aged now, and I've really been thinking a lot about how, having a journey within literature, it's really not just for my books. You're working your first novel and you're just like so hungry, or your first book, and you're so hungry to just like, will I ever be able to publish? And I feel like I'm in this space now where I really think about, I'm not in it for my books. I'm in it for our books, for the big us, right? I want all of our voices and all of our stories. And as a reader, I'm hungry for all of the refractions, and I want to be part of, making more welcoming soil for all of the amazing storytelling and narrative that wants to grow. And that's how we change culture. And cultural change precedes political change.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. One of the things that I think about often, now that you mentioned that you want to see the change for us, not just for your books, but for all of our books.
Yeah.
Part of it for me that I'm excited as a writer, but I'm a lot more excited as a reader. I'm excited to go to a bookstore, to walk into Books and Books, and to see the shelves and see how many queer Latinx writers there are. Just in this moment in time, I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I don't think that this was possible even 5 years ago.
No.
And it feels like, yes, something is definitely changing. And yes, as you were saying, that publishing itself needs to change. I think, yes, we have a lot more books, but I don't think that we still have, for example, the publicity professionals, people working in publicity or marketing, that we have a lot of books, and then we have books that are still being marketed in the same way that they were 5 years ago, and people are kind of struggling, trying to figure out how to do it. I think part of what needs to change is, not just talking about diversity, but actually allowing people access into the publishing industry. And I think, the ways that books are sold is changing, because we have virtual conversations now. Which has a lot to do with the pandemic, but I think that we've been able to reach, just in Miami alone, I do most of my events in Miami, but from Miami we've been able to reach readers in a lot of other places. And I think thinking about how publishing can change, we need to consider not just our own books, not just as a writer, but also as a reader and a consumer of books. I absolutely want to buy books from a bunch of queer Latinx writers, because I am hungry. I feel like I was a teenager who didn't have all those books. I still feel like that teenager, hungry to read those books.
Absolutely, it's still inside. So when you get a book like Juli Delgado Lopera's Fiebre Tropical, it was like, it's such a gorgeous book, and so it's so stunning in on the level of language and the story it tells, but it's also like I was so hungry for all of the mirrors and refractions and windows, that I could experience through that book. Just yeah. So we're, I love what you just said too about, it's about what we cultivate for our cultures, for our communities. It's about what we cultivate and for a better future, for generations to come. And I notice, like I said, for me, it's like más viejita que antes, getting older. For me, this is one of the gifts of getting older, is like really being in this space of like, okay, so like, what are we going to do to ensure goodness for future generations and for the now? But like, yeah, it's really about the us. I'm much more interested in an us than in a me, and the me is part of the us, right?
Yeah. And also, I mean, we all, something that Dalma Llanos Figueroa just said in the chat, we have to fight being the one.
Yes. Because the publishing industry or the systemic way, and I was like, it's the publishing industry. It's like, it's not like it's like that entity or person. It's not about that, right? And there are so many people inside the publishing industry, I just want to say, working today, who are really working for like amazing positive change, and who go to bat for books and often don't get paid enough, and we got to give them a lot of love too. But yes, there is an old model in which you can have one Latino writer, and they'll always speak for all Latinos. And that's just the one. And we don't need any more Latino writers. And I'm not saying Latinx sort of on purpose here in terms of what the lens is, and then that's it. And then you get one Asian person, and you get one of this, you get one queer. And it's better if the queer is white, so they can just talk about queerness and not sort of muddy the waters. I mean, really?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and that is the old model. I mean, James Baldwin got told often that he was muddying the waters by talking about gayness or sexuality, when he should like stay in his lane of talking about anti-Black racism, which is incredibly important to talk about. But he was trying to pioneer intersectionalism, as was Audre Lorde and so many, and they often got that blowback, right? So yes, that is a beautifully said thing, Dalma, about like fighting this thing of being the one. I don't want to be the one. I don't want anyone to be the one. I want us to be a really big, raucous, beautiful us.
Thank you. That's such a wonderful note to kind of end on. We actually had 2 other questions in the chat. And I guess we only have time for one, but I just want to...
Hi, you go ahead and ask them. This is a great conversation. I'm really enjoying it. I'm sure everyone else is, so go for it.
Okay, so a question from Amy. The writing is perfection, but the cover is beautiful too. Yes, I agree. Did you have much input into the design, the cover design?
Oh, well, great. I didn't make the design, but I definitely, which authors, as many people know, don't usually get to be engaged with that. But I did, thank you, Jaquira. But I did get to be engaged in collaboration and conversations around the design. And one of the things that really strikes me about the design is the way it sort of looks like the man is falling into a shadow of himself. And I do sort of feel like we were talking about that internal narrative tension, right? And it really is this like inner journey. And that is really something that really moved me about it. And also it took me days to see that it's a flower, which when you read the book, flowers are important, but I won't say more about that.
Oh, thank you so much. And the last question. Okay. What are your general thoughts about In the Heights? Well, how much time you got?
I know, right?
That's my general thought. That's it.
That's your general thought?
Yeah.
Okay. I am a huge fan of Chiara Alegria Hoods, who co-wrote it, and I think her memoir, My Broken Language, is also stunning. I think that Lin-Manuel Miranda is incredibly talented, and I really appreciate his work. It's great. And I really appreciate that the movie is breaking ground, and I also really appreciate that the very difficult, the very difficult conversation, but important conversation around anti-Blackness, and kind of the erasure of the presence of Afro-Latino people within the film. That is a conversation that we need, and we need to uproot the ways that white supremacy have shaped our Latinx cultures, and uproot anti-Blackness everywhere we see it all the time, within our cultures and everywhere else. And if that takes having uncomfortable conversations, let's do it. Let's do it.
Thank you so much for that, Carolina. And I just want to say, sometimes those conversations don't have to be out in public. Sometimes you can start in your own family at home.
Right.
I think those are just as important.
Those are like key. Have the conversation with your tia, the one, and have the conversations with everybody. I have conversations about anti-Blackness all the time at home, because I'm married to a Black woman and we're raising Black and Afro-Latino kids. I live with my mother. Like we're having the conversations. And I, as a person with white privilege and as a white presenting Latina, have a responsibility to have those conversations all the time, to look at my own privilege, to keep growing and learning. And I invite anyone out there who is also a white presenting Latina or someone with color privilege within Latino community, I invite you to join me on the beautiful journey of dismantling anti-Blackness.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Thank you all for being here. I feel like we're out of time, but I appreciate this conversation. You all, I am very excited and highly recommend The President and the Frog. Please go out and get it. It is beautiful and so full of hope. Thank you so much.
So just to echo Jaquira, this was such a good conversation. I enjoyed it so much, and I'm sure all of you in the audience did as well. And if you haven't ordered your copy of The President and the Frog, please do so. Press the green button, and that green button takes you to our shop site, where you can also order all of Carolina's books. Jaquira's book, Ordinary Girls, it's one of my favorites. I read it in 2018, but I think about it all the time. So thank you guys so much. Thank you for being with us, and hopefully we'll see you in the store soon in person.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Bye.